Because the other thing that I would like to say about this issue is that it's not an issue that's out there. It's an issue that's going to affect us right here. If we look at NAFTA as an example, this trade agreement would be have much larger impact than NAFTA. But if we just look at NAFTA, what did NAFTA do? You had job losses in Mexico, job losses in Canada, and job losses in the United States. So all three countries that were part of NAFTA actually lost jobs. So, and some of the effects of that, decimated the farming industry in Mexico. So a lot of the immigration that we're dealing with right now is the result of us literally putting people out to work in Mexico and sending grain to Mexico that then, put people who were born in Mexico out of work, and so they started, they had to find jobs, so they started moving north. So there are lots of issues that will affect us right here. And when you look at that as an example. So I just want to sort of underscore that it's something that's real and it's not some policy issue that's abstract or that's out there, it's something that's going to affect each of us. And we're very lucky today to have Adam Weissman, who's been working feverishly, nonstop, around the clock, all across the city, and I think maybe across the state, trying to educate as many people as possible on this issue. And he is definitely an expert, so I look forward to not only his presentation, but your questions for him so we can give every last nugget of wisdom that he has. So with that, here's Adam.
Just a quick question. How many people here, by show of hands, prior to hearing about this event, had heard about the Trans-Pacific Partnership? Okay, good bunch of folks. How many people would say that you feel you're at this point fairly familiar with the Trans-Pacific Partnership? Do you have a pretty good sense of what it is? Okay, so 2 people. Great. 3. So there's a bit of a gap there. Well, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, we're told, is trade agreements. We're told that it's about creating jobs and prosperity. We're told that it's about increasing U.S. exports. The Trans-Pacific Partnership is a trade agreement, kind of like the Trojan horse was a gift. Trans-Pacific Partnership, until Japan is a 12-country agreement, including the U.S., Canada, Mexico, Chile, Peru, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Malaysia, Brunei, Vietnam, and Japan. And I think that's all. Japan being the most recent country added. Negotiations on this agreement, this started out as a small regional agreement between some Asian countries, and then the U.S. sort of butted in and brought a whole bunch of other countries and turned this into a much bigger U.S.-dominated agenda as part of a long-term plan to create a U.S.-dominated, really kind of regional and ultimately global free trade bloc with rules that go beyond anything that have anything to do in reality with trade. And just to give a little context, how many people, is anyone here familiar with the corporate coup that almost happened in 1933? Okay, do you want to? Yes.
It was the powers that they FDR might be able to do. Very popular and the powers that be, GE, etc., said, this guy's there, he's an enemy of the United States. You have loyalty among the troops, and they had to get a couple $100,000. They were ready to march on Washington, almost like the thing that happened yesterday, April 4th, 10 to 30 But he just backed out at the last minute, and he wrote a book, The War is a Racket, which he figured out and she was
It tipped off the Roosevelt administration, which some people say actually led to Roosevelt going further in the direction of the New Deal, incidentally. But Stephanie Baldwin, and an interesting footnote, one of the people who was really behind this plot was Prescott Bush. So the long and not so proud legacy there. And this is the bankers were pushing this agenda. The same forces that are trying to shred democracy today were at it way back when. And really, when we talk about TPP, we should dispense with the idea of this as a trade agreement and look at this as a more refined and more sneaky form of what they were trying to do in 1933. This is, in fact, a corporate coup. TPP, by design, is an attack on democracy. It's an attack on national sovereignty. It really is a plot to destroy the power of nations to democratically make laws to protect the interests of their populace against unfettered corporate greed. TPP and agreements like it are designed to create a system of global corporate governance that supersedes national law and puts power and in effect makes corporations more powerful than nations. And just to give us a sense of how we got here, how we got into this particular mess. In much of the 19th century, there really was very little done in the form of trade agreements. The U.S. largely had a universal tariff system that applied to all countries. There were very little in the way of such arrangements with individual countries. There were some, but it was very limited. Going into the 20th century, having basically wanting to move more in that direction and seeing that Congress hadn't been an effective vehicle to do that on its own, power was delegated to the executive branch to act as an intermediary. The Constitution grants the Congress under Article 1, Section 8 the power to deal with international commercial agreements. And since tariffs are in effect or were treated as a tax, as a source of revenue for the nation. At one point, tariffs on imported goods were actually a significant source of U.S. revenue. The Senate Finance Committee and the House Ways and Means Committee were the bodies that dealt with matters of trade. So, but of course, the executive branch is largely the branch that deals with policy making with other countries, with developing treaties. So there's this somewhat of division of power. And so increasingly going into the 20th century, we saw more and more of that power delegated to the executive branch. But originally, that was still dealing with trade, dealing with things like tariffs and quotas, the things that you would expect a trade agreement to deal with. What's the tariff rate on imported freights, or what's our quota on a given product from a different country, and we will lower our tariff if you lower your tariff. The sort of thing that people think about when they think about a trade agreement, the degree that people think about trade agreements at all. Well, what started creeping in was more and more non-tariff issues were being dealt with in these trade agreements. They're being called non-tariff barriers to trade. This is something that, in particular, there are creeping elements before that, but in particular, Richard Nixon made a big point of addressing this as the solution to the U.S. trade deficit, that we were exporting more than we were importing more than we were exporting, and part of the problem was all these laws in other countries that were not tariffs, but were blocking us from sending our goods to those countries. So Nixon pledged that he was going to create new legislation that was going to address this problem of non-tariff barriers to trade. And at first the union thought this was a good idea until they caught wind of what this would look like in practice. So he developed something called Fast Track. And Fast Track was a system that basically took Congress out of the picture to a significant degree and gave the president a massive new power to effectively write legislation via trade agreements. So what these non-tariff barriers to trade mean in effect are our domestic laws that decide a lot of things going beyond physically trade. One clear example are government procurement rules. The rules that decide what products our government buys, things like Buy American programs, were being treated as a non-tariff barrier to trade, things that in government purchasing favor of local purchasing. That can also be things like buy recycled content, buy green programs, buy local. All sorts of things, over time, all sorts of things fell into this category of non-tariff barriers to trade. And what started happening increasingly with the Reagan administration was Reagan started using these trade agreements to slip through all kinds of domestic policy that he knew he couldn't get through in the form of conventional legislation into trade agreements. So if you want, for example, he would build into these agreements various forms of deregulation. And so we've seen more and more trade agreements being used as a means by the corporations to make an end run around Congress in terms of actual legislation, and an end run around the public in terms of anything that we know about. So we see these secretly negotiated trade agreements. TPP in particular has an unprecedented level of secrecy. Barack Obama is actually, in the method of his the U.S. Trade Representative, the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative under Obama has actually moved backwards in terms of transparency from the Bush administration. So what we've seen is that these trade agreements now become a mechanism to circumvent the public interest, to take the things that we've spent generations fighting for: environmental laws, food safety laws, consumer protection regulations, banking regulations, and build into international agreements rules that prohibit these regulations or give corporations new rights to attack these kinds of regulations. And what makes fast track, that Nixon-era policy that Obama is trying to reauthorize, so particularly hideous, is that it really ties Congress's arms behind their back in terms of how this legislation is dealt with. So the president, through his U.S. Trade Representative, can go and make agreements with other countries, does not need prior congressional approval to enter into negotiations with countries, can then go to Congress and say, we've negotiated this trade agreement, we've signed this trade agreement with another country, here's the trade agreement, you have 90 days to vote on it, you can amend it, you're only allowed 20 hours of debate, and then, in fact, the House is only allowed 60 days to vote, the Senate has 90. And after the Senate also, which is, very unlike anything in the Senate also has these strict limits on debates in terms of how much time the legislation can be debated. The bills are forced out of committee. Committees are only allowed to hold on to them for a certain amount of time, so they can't be held up in committee. And so it's pretty much a take it or leave it deal with Congress. So so Congress looks at these things, which they haven't seen up to that point by and large, and they, particularly the TPP, where even members of Congress have strict limits on what they're allowed to see in the text of this agreement. There are 600 corporate advisors to the TPP negotiating process who have extensive access to the negotiating text and use that to influence the negotiations in their interests. Meanwhile, our members of Congress have extremely limited access, can go into a room and see bits and pieces, can't take notes, have limits on the degree to which staff is supposed to. There's allowed to see these texts, and it's allowed to tell anyone what they see. So our members of Congress are basically being prevented from doing their job by the TPP negotiating process. So the trade agreements then go to Congress under fast track, and let's say there are egregious rules that attack environmental laws or food safety laws or labor rights. No member of Congress can amend or remove any of that language. So what happens is all the legislators get pushed like crazy from the corporate lobbyists. It's an up or down vote, and pretty much whenever a trade agreement goes to Congress under fast track, they get passed. Not every trade agreement that goes to Congress goes under fast track. They use fast track essentially for the rotten, stinking trade agreements that they don't want people to read, that they don't want Congress to have any say in, that are really these kind of, again, shortening course agreements that are really they're really not about trade fundamentally. They're about expanding corporate intellectual property rights. They're about attacking public interest regulations. TPP, if you look at who is in TPP prior to the introduction of Japan, pretty much every country in this agreement is a country the U.S. either had a trade agreement with, or really has a tiny economy. So who is going to be buying our products? Were we going to find a massive new market in Vietnam? Was there going to be a huge new market in Brunei? So that's not really what this agreement was initially about. It was not about opening significant new markets. As we'll be hearing about, it is about opening new tariff-free labor forces, being able to attack attack the negotiating power of labor. Well, I'll leave that to you. But, so there are lots of things these agreements really are about, but they're certainly not in reality to a significant degree about expanding trade, but that's what we're told. 5 minutes, okay. So I don't want to get too into the weeds because we hear a lot throughout the day, but I just want to transition into talking a little bit about what we can do about this. And before I do that, I just want to throw out one more little tidbit that I'm sure will be reinforced again and again about how insane what these trade agreements are creating is. You'll be hearing a lot about something called investor-state dispute settlement or investor-state dispute resolution, I'm sure from many of the speakers. And what this is a system that gives corporations, not governments, but corporations, the right to sue governments in international tribunals outside the jurisdiction of a nation's court system, where corporations can sue for unlimited sums, demanding compensation for lost potential future profits. And this exists under NAFTA and many agreements since. Now that's a lot of jargon, probably pretty hard to follow. Give you an example of what this means in practice. There is a company called Pacific Rim. Pacific Rim is a mining company. Pacific Rim wanted to mine for gold in El Salvador. They wanted to mine for gold in El Salvador using toxic chemicals near the river that is the largest source of drinking water in El Salvador. Pacific Rim was blocked from doing this very recently. So Pacific Rim using this with a Canadian company, but they used a subsidiary in the U.S. to claim to be a U.S. company so that they could sue El Salvador for something to the tune of $170 million, demanding compensation. Keep in mind, they didn't spend $170 million. They claimed this is all the money that they have made going into the future. So in fact, in theory, if they found all this gold. So in fact, what these trade agreements authorize is corporate extortion of governments. So this is really what we're fighting here. It turns corporations into superpowers that can bully and intimidate governments into destroying their own laws without compromising their own public interest. And I'm sure we'll hear more from Dave about some of those environmental attacks. But so what can we do about this? So fast track expired in 2007. President Obama feels it is very important to get fast track reauthorized so we can send TPP and the other rotten trade deal he's working with, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, which is a trade agreement with Europe, through Congress, because he knows that if Congress actually has the time to look at this thing, if members of Congress can propose amending this thing, if we can go through, if it can't be rushed, if the public has time to catch wind of this, that there's no way he's going to be able to get this deal through Congress, and there's no way he's going to be able to pay back all those corporations without getting reelected. So President Obama, moreover, the TPP negotiations haven't been going that well. There have been a lot of sticking points. They're going much more slowly than they hoped. And so President Obama's big hope is to get fast track so he can tell the other countries, we're serious about this thing. Because the other countries are saying, we're having massive protests at home. In Mexico, there are 65,000 people in the streets. In Malaysia, people are protesting. In Japan, there are massive petition drives and protests before Japan even joined the trade agreement. There are protests, many of the countries that are just being considered for this trade agreement are already on people outraged, like the Philippines, which is considering changing major domestic laws to change laws about foreign property ownership as a precondition of joining the TPP. So governments are asking, why should we put ourselves into a bind with our own populaces and make ourselves unpopular for this trade agreement that you, U.S., aren't even sure you can deliver? This has to go through your Congress after you, the U.S. trade representative, and negotiated, the president signed it. If you can't even get this fast track to Congress, why should we piss off our people rather than take us out of government? So Obama needs fast track for the political maneuvering with these other countries. And so if we can hold up fast track, if we can prevent fast track from passing, we both give Congress better chance of stopping this trade agreement, and we make it much harder for Obama to seal the deal. Now, taking it home to this particular congressional district, as I'm sure everyone here knows, there's a major election coming up, probably the most significant general election in the city. the only one where there's really going to be a race. So it is absolutely vital that this be made an issue in the election, that both candidates be talked to on this issue. The good and somewhat surprising news is that Michael Grimm, who in 2011 voted for terrible trade deals with Colombia, South Korea, and Panama, actually has come out against fast track. He came out against a fast track bill that was introduced early this year that now is effectively dead. The Bipartisan Trade Priorities Act of 2014 that was so bipartisan that they couldn't find any House Democrat to co-sponsor it. So, and he was one of several Republicans who actually signed a letter to President Obama expressing opposition to fast track. So he's actually surprisingly enough on the right track on this issue. So now there's an opportunity to go to the other guy and say, hey, do you want to get to the right of Michael Grimm? So both of them need to be pressured on this, and we need to talk about this in the election. Talk about how this is going to cost U.S. jobs. Talk about how our national sovereignty is under attack. Talk about how our environmental and consumer goals are under attack, and talk about how it is the responsibility of our Congress to respect our Constitution, which gives Congress the power to make our laws and deal with trade agreements, and moreover deal with all these other things that the President has no business butting into, that they're sneaking into trade agreements that are supposed to be things that Congress does, that are not dealt with in international trade agreements that are negotiated in secret, but that go through a democratic process where the people have input and where laws are passed that actually do the things we want. Because the corporations are pushing this because of things like people holding up the acceptance of the XL pipeline, because they can't get fracking through here, because there's too much democracy, because as much of an oligarchy as we are, we're not enough of one for the corporations. So this is their final endgame strategy, to kill what little we have of democracy, what little bit we have of democracy once and for all. So I'm confident we're not going to let them do that. We're winning in the fight against TPP, but we need your help. We need everyone's help throughout the city, but this district in particular, to make a real impact on this issue. So I'll end by just mentioning that there are ways that people can get involved immediately and learn more. This is one of 4 TPP educational events this weekend. There's another event at 4 o'clock today in Manhattan, where we're going to be talking about the international fight against TPP. Tomorrow evening, there is a conference call about TPP's threat to jobs. On the 24th, there's a march against Monsanto, where TPP is going to be a major focal issue. And talking about how Monsanto is using TPP to attack GMO bans. And then on June 9th, Peace Action Manhattan is holding a teach-in on TPP as well. So there's lots of opportunities to learn more and lots to be done. So I'll turn over to the other speakers who will tell you more, and I look forward to talking with you during the Q&A about how we can take action and flush the TPP. Next slide.
Adam, if you could, because of what you just said, sort of the foundation, I think maybe before we move on to some of the other speakers, if there are any questions about some of what you just said, because there was a lot in there, and I feel like it's important for us to establish a foundation and really understand everything that he's talking about before we move on to some of these individual issues. So if there are any sort of pressing questions that anyone has, maybe we can take a question or two now before we move on, and then we'll do some more questions after the additional speakers. And while you're formulating your question, I would just say one thing. You might be pro-labor, you might be pro-trade, you might think to yourself, maybe this agreement can't be as terrible as it sounds. What I would say is that this thing about stopping fast track, you could still think that you might want this trade agreement to happen, but certainly we can all agree that hearing what's in the deal is something that Americans ought to have the right to do. And so at least stopping fast track and having a conversation about this is something that we can all get behind, whether we think we might want it to pass or not pass. The American people should at least have an opportunity to hear that. And Elizabeth Warren, and I want to underscore this with Elizabeth Warren, and also Michael Bloomberg. I personally found it difficult to talk about this issue because it sounds so crazy that I feel like I sound crazy when I talk about it. But what I can tell you is that Elizabeth Warren has said publicly many times, she actually said yesterday, that if the American people knew what was in this deal, they would stop it. She can't tell us what's in every deal, and that you said, but she said if the American people knew what's in this deal, they would stop it. And Michael Bloomberg has come out against it as well. So, as crazy and outlandish as some of these things sound, I assure you that there is some substance to it. So, are there any questions? Yes.
How would the general public know? How would the general public, rather than giving money, be able to be involved? How do you make sure that the average Joe Schmo knows what's going on when he is worried about unemployment and blah, blah, blah? In other words, how do you make it not?
Great question. Very good question. So part of the reason. Okay, let me ask you a question very quickly. How many people have found out about the TPP for the first time through an article in the mainstream media? How many people? Okay. Let's go to print media first. How many people have heard that through a newspaper article or magazine article in the mainstream media? Not in these towns, not other journals. Okay. How many people have heard about it through broadcast media, through radio or television? Again, mainstream, not Democracy Now! So, the Ed Show, which is, as far left as you can get in mainstream media. And the Ed Show is, in fact, literally the only show in the mainstream. This is not an exaggeration, it's actually a study on this. The Ed Show, I think it's been commented on about once or twice on any other shows. The Ed Show is literally the only show in the mainstream media covering this topic. Not covering it from a progressive perspective, the only broadcast program that is talking about TPP is the Ed Show. Rachel Maddow doesn't touch it, Chris Higgins doesn't touch it, none of the other MSNBC people talk about it. You certainly aren't going to see it on CBS or NBC, and God knows Fox are going to talk about it. Right. Well, why is that? I mean, I think the answer is pretty obvious. But just to really illustrate how blatant it is and what a fundamental conflict of interest it is, there is an organization called the U.S. Business Council for TPP. It is a big list, the membership of many of the corporations that you and I all hate the most. It's Citigroup, it's Walmart, it's Chevron, it's Exxon. It's basically everyone that's destroying the world, almost, is in this thing. And among the corporations in it are Time Warner, Viacom, and News Corp. Three of the biggest media corporations. And Walmart is in it too. Really interested in some of the intellectual property rules they're building into this trade agreement. So pretty much the media has not only the vested interest in passing this trade agreement, but this quote-unquote trade agreement, but is actually lobbying on it. So I mean, how can, at that point, it's not the thing where you see the Daily News every day putting up petitions about saying they kept the worst characters, and then they have articles. Well, they're doing a petition on an issue. How can you be expected to forget on the issue? You're doing a petition on an issue. How can you be expected to objectively report on a topic that you were actively lobbying members of Congress on? So the media has a vested interest in not letting people know this thing exists. So yeah, I mean that leads to the question: how are people supposed to know about it? Getting over to alternative media, which obviously has done a much better job of covering it, is one thing. Another thing is events like this. Trade Justice as an organization is actually a coalition of independent organizations working together to stop these trade agreements. But something that we've done more and more within the last year or so is try to develop chapters within different congressional districts to focus on how we can organize in local communities and put pressure on local elected officials. And we talked to David about trying to see if we can develop a chapter within this congressional district, within Michael Graham's home turf, to here on Staten Island, to really make this a political issue and a news issue in the community. Because while we're not going to get it in the media, probably we're not going to get it in the Post, we probably can get it in the neighborhood papers. We've had a lot of success doing that in Queens when we did a protest against Joe Crowley. And we got, Joe Crowley was one of the two holdouts who had not at that point come out against the current fast track bill in the city. We held a demonstration with about 125 people in front of his office on a weekday by a couple of the the weekly papers, all the Queen's weekly papers came out a couple days later. Every one of them just about reported on the story. 3 days later, Crowley announced that he was coming out against the fast track bill. So we can have an influence on this issue, and we can get attention for it. If we go community by community and work together to educate our neighbors and let our politicians know that people know and are watching them on this issue.
So one more question. Yeah.
I know I heard second to last page or something about this was something about net neutrality or controlling the internet. Can you go into that? That's all I heard.
Yeah, there are big internet issues around TPP. TPP is intellectual property rules. One of the areas that they threaten is internet freedom. Basically, TPP will potentially turn your internet service provider into Big Brother. They're supposed to monitor if you're downloading files that are copyrighted. If you email someone a recipe that's copyrighted, if you download a recipe, buy a recipe online, you email it to mom. That you could be in legal trouble for doing that. If your computer makes a buffer copy of a file, which is an automatic computer process, potentially that's a copyrighted content, you could be in trouble for that. TPP is, because of its internet rules, TPP has been described as the biggest threat to free speech and intellectual property that you've never heard of by the ACLU. So the internet issues are very serious, and groups like the Electronic Frontier Foundation, Knowledge Ecology, Public Knowledge, OpenMedia.ca are deeply concerned about TPP. It's been described as the son of SOPA, the Stop Online Piracy Act, and this is all these crazy rules that are designed to supposedly designed to protect corporate intellectual property, but what they really do is attack the free internet and expand corporate power on the internet and limit our freedom. And it's a complicated issue, so I'm being a little vague, but there's a fact sheet on the table over there that actually addresses this very issue, and there are a lot of good websites that deal with this question. And I think TPP Info is one of them. There's a website, stopthetrap.net. If you go to our website, tradejustice.net/TPP, I think we have a section that deals with some of the internet issues, but yeah, it's one of the major things that people are organizing on TPP against, because it really, it attacks online innovation and creativity, and really attacks free speech on the internet in the name of protecting corporate intellectual property.
So one last thing to underscore as we move on to the next subjects is this idea of international court. This is one of the issues where when I talk about this, I feel like I sound crazy. So this court, it's important to understand, is not a court of nations, it's a court of corporations, right? And these corporations can sit in judgment on nations and basically render decisions saying a law or a regulation that this nation put in place damaged our potential for profit. This is what we estimate our profit to be, and because you passed this law, you did damage to us of $400 million or $1 billion or whatever it is that they estimate, and then they can sue us. And the people who would judge our nation are other corporations. So this is a really important thing to keep in mind as we hear about the fight for labor rights, as we hear about the fight against fracking and so on. Laws, regulations, and rules that we put in place can be challenged by corporations, and then judgments on those challenges would be by corporations. So with that, I want to introduce Steve Watt. I'm very happy to have Steve Watt here. He's a communication with America. They do a lot of good work on a lot of issues, money in politics, fighting for labor rights and so on, and they've also been very active on this issue.
Well, thank you all for coming out. It's a beautiful spring morning to talk about such a dark issue. Adam spoke about a lot of the specifics about what the TPP is, and we talked about how this tribunal is going to have international, this tribunal corporation can have this power over regulations, state regulations, country regulations that include environment, labor, health. But I thought I'd pick out one here that I think also might, make you think, also could undermine things like Buy American legislation. Right? Like we have state government that sometimes we push legislation for them to have to buy American products for government projects. Stuff like that could be undermined by the TPP if the tribunal decides that regulation is in contrary to what they quote as the loss of expected future profits, is what the language would be in that part there. And again, we're talking about the main goal of TPP is to provide safe investment in the South Pacific and in the East there, and to also access service markets. And that's why the communication worker is so interested in this issue. We represent telephone workers, which means that we have a lot of call centers. A lot of call center work. We have my local in Staten Island actually represents 250 workers at a Xerox call center who does the EasyPass system. And a lot of those workers actually live in Brooklyn. So, it is going to have an effect on the workers that live in this community and in my community in Staten Island, especially because the flow of capital to these other countries like Vietnam, I mean, that's like, you can make a switch, go off, and you can take all those call center jobs and move them right over to South Vietnam. But anyhow, so anyhow, that's one of the reasons why when Verizon goes on strike, that's probably big news. We went on strike 2 years ago. We're always under the gun of losing this call center, because once our contracts kind of protects those jobs in language, and as soon as our contract is up and we're on strike, the company can start to offshore those jobs. And so that's always a leverage that we have over our heads, and we've given up a lot in ways of benefits and things like that to keep those jobs here. So this type of legislation, they always say that, all the gains, Walter Reuther said this, all the gains organized there would be wiped out one swipe of the legislative pen. And that's sort of what's going to happen here. It's going to give the corporations leverage to undermine all the gains the workers have fought for so many years. Again, a lot of this stuff is not in the open, so we don't really know specifically every detail of the TPP, but we definitely can look at history and come up with a good idea how it's going to affect workers, right? And with NAFTA, one of the interesting things there was, Clinton really went out there and said this thing was the greatest thing that ever happened to work jobs and the country and globally. It's going to be the greatest thing, and it was going to increase standard of living of workers globally, and it's going to bring, he said it was going to bring us, I think, somewhere around 200,000 jobs. But at that point in time, we had a trade surplus. So we were running at a surplus at that point, which, gives us a little bit of power globally. But since that, and his promise was 200,000 jobs, we've actually lost over 700,000 jobs. And we've gone back from that point on in the last, since '93 when it was passed, and we actually went into a deficit, trade deficit since that. We never got out of it. Somewhere towards, I don't know where it's at now, but in 2010 it was 97 billion, somewhere around there, which really weakens the dollar and our global power, and undermines our markets. Also, Obama did the same thing. He went out there and promised with the South Korean trade that this thing's going to be great, it's going to create jobs, and it was going to help bring us 70,000 jobs. We've actually today lost about 40,000 jobs to South Korea. So when it comes to terms of jobs, we don't have a history since this trade agreement's been going on of creating jobs. It just doesn't exist. There's no job being created out of this trade. What we have is our capital being sent out of state. There's no investment being here. There's no investment here in America anymore. It's all being done elsewhere, right? We're not building any factories. We're not building any manufacturing lines here. It's just going overseas. So we go to the service sector, which again is my main, that's where I represent most of my workers. We estimate right now that we've probably lost about 3.4 million jobs offshore. And this is like technology jobs, telecommunication jobs, call center work and stuff like that. But also things like, other jobs like accounting, programming. There's so many jobs that we don't think about that can be done anywhere, right? And so you're going to lose a lot of work to the TPP. Just to give you an idea, right now, the CWA is a big supporter of what they call the U.S. Call Center Bill. It's a bill that's actually pushing some rights for customers too. Where you can, if you call up, everybody has a call center. Everyone's buying online now, right? And you always never goes right. You always have to call. And we spend a lot of time talking to the people from the companies and everything. And you get people from all over the world, and it's hard to understand them. It's an issue to Americans. We're pushing legislation right now that would make you as a customer, you have a right to know where that call is being answered. Right? You would say, you have to tell you this is being answered in India. Our legislation will also give you the right to demand it broadcast to an American that you can speak to. Also, part of the bigger part of that legislation, the U.S. Call Center Bill, is to take away tax subsidies from companies that take those jobs overseas, right? But all that will be wiped out with the TPP. This is really good legislation that's to promote good jobs for our community and for our country. And TPP will give this tribunal, give the corporations, the multinational corporations, the power to undermine that legislation. And that's really dangerous. That's very dangerous. Manufacturing, of course, we already know where manufacturing is going. So it's likely that we're going to see some more loss of whatever little manufacturing we have left, unfortunately. And there's also this rule of origin, which means that this is a good one. This is like, so, we could buy a product, our trade could be with South Korea, but they don't have to actually be making that product in whole in South Korea. So only 35% of what's being manufactured has to be made at the country we're in trade with. So they could actually make this thing 65% somewhere else, and it gives them more ability to go around and find exported workers somewhere in the region, and make this even from China or wherever, and bring it into South Carolina and then trade it with us. So there's all kinds of, they're really learning. They've learned how to trade. They learned from NAFTA, they've learned from the South Korea trade, they're getting better at it, and every time they do it, they're trying to find more and more ways to protect their capital and, keep us all out of it. There's also another byproduct to the public sector part of the loss of work and jobs. It's also going to affect us in the public sector, right? Because when we have a loss of jobs, we have a loss of tax revenue. And we also have increased demand for services, employment, and welfare issues. So you could see, this is more stress on the public side of things also. We're living in a time when we see our public workers being attacked as if they're the problem in society. We see teachers being attacked all over the place. They're trying to cut their pensions and make them work longer and do all kinds of stuff to them. This is put more stress on that, and the tax revenue shrinks potentially. So there's also it could also push for more privatization of public sector work. Because there could be a regulation that, or the tribunal, as they call it, could actually put pressure on state governments to privatize some of this work. So we definitely are worried about that also. And if you look at like Detroit and what happened in Detroit, that's a perfect example of trade, jobs lost, a city government that felt the pressure of that because of the demands and services and the lack of tax revenue. And that's a big factor why Detroit is in the situation that they're in now. And many of the old, strongholds of the auto industry has feeling those effects of NAFTA currently. So, anyway, but most of all, there's also the old idea of how does competition affect workers' wages. And we all know, I mean, it's pretty clear in economic, I'm not an economist, but I do understand from a union perspective on my experience that when workers are competing for work, wages go down. Right? There's more workers than there is work. So that's something that, those corporations and those that need to make as much money as possible try to create, right? So that's why you have the right to work and the move of capital to the south at one period in our history. And now that's also why these free trade agreements and these trade agreements are so lucrative to corporations today, is that, as long as they can keep moving to new workers and keep that mass of workers, out there, they'll be able to lower wages. And we're talking about competing with Vietnamese people who their minimum wage is 28 cents an hour, 28 cents an hour. And we're talking about minimum wage being at 10.10. I mean, really, that's not enough in the reality of the world. 28 cents an hour. This is what we're going to be competing with as workers. And the workers in my industry will be competing with this directly. Workers in a call center. Every time they go for a contract, I like to think that the workers in the communication workers, the ones that have been answering the phones from Verizon, have been fighting for their contract for 30 years and have moved up, had an upward mobility, where they're in the middle class, they're doing pretty well. I mean, but those jobs are in big time decline, and those jobs are not going to be available for another generation. This type of pressure is already putting pressure and putting those people, those workers' lives into decline. And it's tough to go buy clothes these days that isn't made in really nasty areas that we see children working in. But we do know that in Vietnam, especially, that there is a problem with child labor. So as Americans, we like to consume. We do, every time we're buying one of these products, we have to consider that that's what we're helping. We're helping to exploit children workers and exploit poor workers, and we're also helping to exploit workers that are under oppressive regimes. And this is the type of thing that we're going to be doing if this thing passes, and most of our protests will be made in Vietnam. That gives me that really weighs on my heart. I think about my children. I have an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old, and these kids are happy living in Staten Island, right? And going to Catholic school, which I'm so happy I'm able to even afford. And I see how they have no idea of the harm and the negative things that can happen in life in the world. And these children, have to go to work and work in such oppressive conditions. There was also this myth about these type of trade deals bringing up globally other workers who are standards. I'm talking about worker rights, the right to organize, free union, free labor organizations, the right to collectively bargain. The things that we find fundamental in our country. When the politicians sell it, they're going to make it sound as if, hey, this is our way of bringing what we do to globally. But the facts, again, are not exactly that. It seems that, and there's some data from organizing campaigns in America and how they've been affected since we've had NAFTA and some of the other trade deals. And basically, employers always used to threaten to close down the shop if you organize work. Right? Every organizing campaign has this moment where the boss tells the workers, "Oh, if you join the union, we're going to close down. We can't afford it." And again, this is where right to work actually came in as a leverage point, because some companies actually did close down and go south, which so you know, when you talk about the 80s, about 29% of employers use that threat in organizing campaigns that they would have. In the 1990s, 50% of employers, after 50% of employers were using that threat. Currently, because now, you know, they're using the same playbook, but they're trying to break the union. 57% of employers use the "I'm going to close down and join the union" threat. But it becomes much more real when you put the global economy on the mind of the worker. You know, it seems like it can happen. It's a very big deterrent for people to not join the union and not to take their rights and not to collectively bargain, because they're saying, you know, I need this job. There's no work out there. There's so much unemployment right now. How am I going to join the union? I'm not going to put myself in front of the boss like that, you know, and be a hero and then lose my job, and my wife and kids are not going to have any food coming in. I'm going to have to go on public assistance. This is what they got to think about. And when the boss says, "Oh yeah, we'll move out of the country. When you join this union, you know, we'll all be out there." In actual closings, it went from 2% to today, currently about 15% of employers actually shut down in the face of an organizing campaign. Recently, we've had some success. There was an issue with Boeing that tried to do it. You know, this is where the labor board comes in, and Obama did put in a pro-labor board, which is helping us kind of fight back on that. But in the Bush years and stuff like that, when the Republicans had put, you know, an anti-worker labor board in place, closings were happening a lot more frequently. You know, and also, you know, there's another part to this thing. See, we live in a free and safe country, I guess, right? I mean, much more than in South Vietnam and Colombia and Mexico and some of these other places where we're doing this free trade. And our government doesn't come around, you know, and enslave us the way that in some of these more oppressive places are. But, you know, this free trade, we've actually seen violence against union organizers on the rise in places like Colombia and South America, where violence is used to keep the workers from organizing. It's a major, major problem. And it's being funded by the American dollar. When you consider it's all about protecting the capital flow and, you know, these products being made in these countries, you know, and so, you know, we were going to go to Vietnam, you know, a country that my dad fought for in Vietnam when he was drafted. You know, to say that we're going to go there now and open up a factory that does nothing to uplift the workers' lives just to make money is really kind of disgusting to me, you know. You know, violence against workers and organizers and people that are there for human rights is going to on the rise because these are very oppressive governments, and they are making the money on these deals, not the workers. So there's a lot at stake, and they're going to do whatever they can. Think about what this country was like in the 1920s and 30s, right? When workers organized and there was violence involved. And that's what it's like in these conditions in places that don't have these fundamental rights already in place. So that's a pretty bleak and ugly picture for the workers in the world today. But, you know, I think that here we are in a house of God, right? And I come from the radical conception of Jesus telling me that I'm supposed to love my neighbor, and that we should never use the power of a nation to oppress another people, and that we should be using our power, if anything, to uplift the people, to bring them all up to the standards that I think even God would want us to do. Right? I have to, as a Christian, Catholic, I'm sorry, but I am, believe that I would go to church and learn every week, which is I'm supposed to help the needy, the poor, the sick, those that are in need. I'm not supposed to use the power of my nation and go to a country and help oppress and perpetuate violence and take advantage and exploit children. All right, so for me, I think that if I had the choice, I would use our market power to promote human rights, democracy, and use our resources to feed, clothe, and heal the impoverished nations. Thank you.
Now we're going to move on we're going to do questions after the next couple of speakers. Dave is leaving, so apparently he's not going to keeping on this thread of this isn't an issue that's out there, it's an issue that's close to home, the next speaker is going to be Dave Dahl, and he's going to talk a bit about how our fight here in New York with fracking could potentially be impacted by TPP and by this international court. And it's important to remember that, this issue isn't just about fracking and potential impacts of water and all those sorts of things, but it would also, I think, affect New York City very directly in that the gas has got to get to market. And if you're following the fracking industry very closely, you know that there are lots of plans in the works right now to develop liquefied natural gas ports all around the coast of New Jersey and Long Island and New York. So it's not just something that, fracking would happen up in the state, but we're talking about pipelines and gas ports and so on. So there's a lot of issues around this, and it's something that's going to be close to home.
Thank you, Jamie. Hey, can you all hear me? I got a pretty loud mouth, my mother used to say. I shouldn't need this. I want to thank the Good Shepherd Church and Reverend Robyn for letting us do this here today. And I thank you all for coming out, and for Vicky and Adam, who is the point man on the TPP. If you have a question, you want to talk to Adam. He knows more about it than all of our politicians together. I don't know if that's saying a lot, but he is the man. So about the environment, I mean, the whole thing is just, my mind is all over the place. I mean, you turn on the television, I guess we all know about Justin Bieber, right? What a tragedy. Right? Or Karl Rove with his statements about Hillary Clinton. This is all we're seeing on the news. The TPP is, it's what? What's the TPP? So nobody's heard about the TPP, and that's not a mistake. They don't want you to know about this. This is something they like to keep swept under the rug, get it passed, and keep moving, As the cops would say, there's nothing to see here, keep moving along, So, I've been involved with the anti-fracking movement for the past couple of years. I suppose you all kind of know what fracking is and what's going on with that, and how the energy industry is basically going to trash our earth at profits for a few, and it's a totally unnecessary thing. I was the other night at a forum which was tankers, turbines, and on our energy future, and it was all about the windmills. And how a wind farm is this close to being actually started out off Montauk. It's taken years and years to get this going, and all these alternative energy sources are there. The technology is ready to go. Many countries, other countries are already using 20, 30, 40% of alternative energy sources. The United States, and New York in particular, I mean, Jersey is number 2 in the country for solar power. New York is, I think, number 40 or something. So the greatest city on earth, we are really falling behind. And I don't think it's your fault. I think it could be the fault of the energy companies who don't want to lose their profits. And I understand that. Money is, I hate to say it, but a lot of people, money is God. And they are worshiping at that altar. And they don't want to let go of the power and the prestige that they hold. So we are up against a deeply entrenched, heavily moneyed opposition. And this is, quite frankly, this is war. I've been out to Pennsylvania and seen people who live in areas where they're fracking, and they have not wanted to lease their property. And these companies have basically come in and done what they wanted to do, and people have no rights against these companies. There's a woman, Vera Scroggins, out in Pennsylvania, who they're trying to keep her from going out and speaking in public. In America, the greatest country in the world, in the history of all time, that this woman can't go out and speak her mind about what's going on in our world. So, we talk about oppressive governments over in other places, but right here, we're being oppressed. Our Constitution, which is a great, wonderful thing, is being trampled on. And the people are not being given a choice. We, the people, are going to be told how business is going to be run. This TPP thing was written up by a bunch of corporate lawyers. And I think we all know how much corporate lawyers care about humanity. So maybe there's a couple of good ones, but I think they're far and few between. So it's, as you've heard a couple of times today too, it's to me one of the most amazing. There's so much paperwork on this, and Adam again is an encyclopedia about this. But the thing that sticks out to me most is that if this thing is passed, companies all around the world will be able to sue New York because we can't come here and do our fracking. And if we were allowed to go there and do it, we would make $1 billion in a couple of weeks. So we're going to sue you for $1 billion. And I think you all know who's going to pay that bill. So this is what's going on. They're trying to give the corporations even more power than they've ever had before. And there would be a big mistake to allow this to happen. This is a time when I'm seeing many more small farms popping up upstate. People are talking about the 100-mile rule, buying stuff that's grown locally, and all this fracking and infrastructure that comes with it, that runs through people's property. None of this has anything to do with good farming techniques. It's not going to protect our food. There's just so much going on. I mean, there's places upstate now where they're trying to not allow them to dump frack waste from Pennsylvania, upstate New York, radioactive waste, all right, radioactive waste, and just dump it in landfills upstate New York because they're depressed, they don't have money. You know, I mean, really in this life, we need food, we need clean water. Our bodies are 85% water, I believe. So we're basically walking bags of water. And if we don't protect our water supply, we'll have nothing. It won't matter whether you're a Buddhist or a Hindu or a Christian or a Republican or a Democrat. If we don't have clean water, we're screwed. Excuse my French, but that's basically the way it's looking. So, and it's been proven now that this fracking has been contaminating water. And I think that these two counties in Pennsylvania where they've done fracking, like 60% of the water supplies in those two counties has already been compromised now. And people who live in an area where there's, let's say there's 1,000 homes and nobody wants to lease to the fracking companies, and they get one person to lease, so that one person does it, they're all drinking out of the same aquifer often and getting water from the same sources. Once that one person has leased their property and the contamination gets into the water, they're all polluted. So, and these fracking companies are saying that people are going to get rich and it's going to be great boom for American energy independence. We could do this with renewable energy. We don't need to do this with fracking and the same old fossil fuels. I've been working with people, some really good, dedicated people, and I'm learning more and more about it. And this is just totally unnecessary. It's a fuel of the past. We all saw Hurricane Sandy. Anybody who lives in New York here saw what happened with that. And I think it'd be foolish to think that it's not going to happen again. The ice caps are melting at an alarming rate. You know, we could be a beachfront property here in a couple of months the way things are going. They were saying that this is going to take a lot longer, and now the scientists are saying that things are happening at a much quicker rate than they expected. So, you know, if we're not going to protect what we have left of this beautiful earth and this Garden of Eden which we've been given to live in, then, you know, then we put up the white flag and we give up. But we the people are the only ones who are going to make this change. You know, back when the suffragettes, when women wanted to get the right to vote in this country, all right, it took people to stand up for their rights. When the civil rights movement came along and people wanted to have the right to vote, it's hard for me to believe that blacks didn't have the right to vote when I was 10 years old in this country. It's just shocking. And so people had to stand up for their rights. And so this is what we're going to have to do. This is not going to be a spectator thing. We're all going to have to make calls, talk to our politicians, tell them that we're very much against this, and tell them that we're going to be watching what they're doing and how they're voting, because if they're not going to protect us, you know, then they have to go. And, you know, the other night I was watching about the NSA and the spying, the United, you know, this whole spying thing in the United States and what's going on. And I found it amazing that we have an NSA, we have a Homeland Security, the FBI, the CIA, but who's protecting our environment? And, you know, I mean, the people who are supposed to be protecting our environment, unfortunately, so a lot of these federal agencies, the DEC, the Department of Environmental Conservation, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, they're all just allowing corporations to do what they want. The people who work for them are in and out of industry. They go back and forth. They're in politics. They're working for a corporation next. They're in an EPA next. They're just going back and forth. It's an incestuous den, and we're not being protected. Kids with asthma rates in New York City, 1 in 3 kids now has asthma in New York. I mean, we're dying here. I grew up on 81st Street between Ridge and Colonial. Out of 34 houses on that block, I can document 32 cases of cancer of families that I grew up with. Now, if that's not epidemic, I don't know what is. You don't have to point to some so-called third world country to look at what's going on here. It's happening right here in our good old United States of America. So if we don't protect what we have and what we love and what we care for, it's going to go away. And we have to rise up and let them know that this is unacceptable. And I don't think Marty Golden's going to be the one to do it. I think Mr. Grimm, he sees his constituents are blue collar workers, and he understands where his bread is buttered, and at least some of it. And so he realized that he had to go up against this thing. But at the same time, he voted to put a pipeline through Gateway National Recreation Area. They're going to put a pipeline for natural gas right through Reese Park this summer. That's Gateway National Recreation Area. If you can't afford to go to Fire Island or the Jersey Shore or out to the Hamptons, if you'd like to go to Reese Park, which has been, for me, it's been a mecca. It's one of the most beautiful places in the world. It's 15 minutes away. You can be out there on a bicycle in a half an hour or 40 minutes, and they're going to run a pipeline right underneath it. They're going to put a huge swath of cement under there. They're going to dredge that out to put this apron in, and then run this pipe through there. Now, if you know about Jamaica Bay and Starrett City and all that there, they were dumping toxic waste there for 30 years till they finally shut these guys down. These guys were bringing in more toxic waste at nighttime than the dump was getting in the daytime. And all that stuff is leaching into that bay. And they're going to dredge this stuff up right in the middle of the summer, too. They want to do it right to start on July 4th weekend, just in time for beach season. So when you go out, make sure you have your wetsuit and a scuba tank and a mask, because you wouldn't want the water to be touching your skin. It could get really ugly out there. And again, this is our national recreation area. This is the only ones who would allow. They were the only willing partner to allow this to be done. This started back in 2009. We didn't know about it till 2012, 2011. I mean, it was so Bloomberg and his cronies pushed this through, and the rich are getting richer, and the rest of us are just getting older. So we need to protect what we have, folks. If you care about this planet, you vote against this TP with your vocal and your strength, and let our politicians know how you feel. And if you have any questions, ask Adam. Yes, sir.
I don't know if most of you know about it or not, but on Thursday, Jamie just announced that he's going to start running against Marty Golden for Senate.
Yes.
And so I wish on May 28th or after, when they start petitioning for Jamie, please sign this petition and vote for him to get him into the New York Senate.
I agree with that. Yes.
We are going to do question and answer. We have two more speakers. We're going to do group now, or? Okay, we're going to do two more speakers, and then we're going to open up the questions, because I know that questions are already building. But I want to move to our next speaker, Mary Martinez. Yes, please. Yes, my name is Kemmerer. This is the beginning, and I apparently want to say Senate, so we're here today to talk about TEP. I don't want to take advantage of this event. So, our next speaker is Mary Martinez, and again, keeping with this idea that this is going to affect us here at home. It's often said, I say in articles all the time, that Bay Area is a naturally occurring retirement community. So access to healthcare, access to education is something that's really important to this community. And I think Mary's going to tell us a little bit about how TEP can affect that as well.
See, if you can see yourself, it's good. Oh, I'm sorry.
My voice is going, so I'm going to be.
I don't think the mic is catching you.
Yeah. Okay, I'm Mary, and I work at Montefiore Medical Center in the Division of Environmental Sciences and Pediatrics. And I like what Adam said when he's asked, how do people hear about this? And actually, I figured what would happen happened that a lot of us didn't really hear about it in the Times or something like that. And when I started looking at this, I got on the website for Doctors Without Borders, because that's one of, kind of my favorite groups that's doing, humanitarian medical work all over the world. And what I found was in one of their briefings, they called the TPP the closed door negotiations. And what they did was they listed from 2010 through 2012, 14 different rounds of negotiations that were held all over the world, but also like in Virginia, in San Diego, in Dallas, but in Brunei and Kuala Lumpur. And these were the kinds of things that I think none of us really know that much about that actually took place. And there was a lot of talk amongst a lot of governments that would really directly impact, and we didn't have a word in any of this. And in December, last December, 6 members of Congress wrote a letter to Obama, specifically talking about access to health care and how these negotiations were going on really hush-hush. And right off the bat, right at the beginning of the letter, they say to Obama, knowing of your commitment to improving access to affordable health care in the United States and around the world, we write to ask you to ensure that the ongoing negotiations of the TPP agreement do not include provisions that would undermine that goal. We also write, and this I think is really key, and it's something that we've been talking about this morning, is we also write to urge that your administration not make any final trade agreements that affect critical health issues until members of Congress and the public have been given the opportunity to review provisions and provide input on their impact. And this is something that is really key. And for us, like Jamie said, we're all dealing with the issue of access to affordable medicine. And with the TPP, a number of things are affected by what the TPP proposes. And as far as access to medicine, there are 3 kind of umbrella things that are raised, and it's all, these 3 things all have to do with the patents that the pharmaceuticals, the major pharmaceuticals hold on the medicines that we're trying to access. So one of the things that TPP will enable pharmaceuticals to do is extend the patents beyond the 20-year period, which now is what the pharmaceuticals have. And then what they're also providing the pharmaceuticals for is to re-patent medicines that are already out there, but the changes, the tweaking that the pharmaceuticals do is so minor, but it still meets criteria under TPP to re-patent this stuff. And the last thing is, and this is, I mean, for us, for most of us, this is key. It blocks manufacturers of generics to get out there and put the effective drugs on the market. But importantly, equally important, or perhaps more important, is that those drugs do not cost as much as the brand names or the brand drugs. And I mean, me personally, I was hit with a big increase in an anti-seizure drug that I needed. And so my monthly bill went from something like less than $15 to closer to $600, and that is with my coverage. And that's here. So you can imagine, and perhaps we can't imagine, what other communities are dealing with as far as accessibility to medicine in the various different countries. I have a letter here. Actually, it's something that was published by Rohit Malpani, who's with Doctors Without Borders, and he writes about India's strict patentability regs, and he compares it to the US and other parts of Europe. And what he says is, in India, they actually have more stringent regs than us and Europe. And he talks about a case in India concerning the pharmaceutical Novartis and a widely used cancer drug. And so he says that India's patentability regs, they're really stringent as to what is patentable and what isn't patentable. And they're very, very strict about this. And he writes, there are numerous examples of how India's application of strict standards of patentability has resulted in improved access to medications. For example, a secondary patent application on a life-saving cancer drug by Novartis, the pharmaceutical, was rejected because it was a modified form of an already known substance. Of course, Novartis challenged, and the Supreme Court in India upheld their initial decision. And they said it was legally validating a choice by the Indian Parliament to better define standards of patentability for medicines. While a patent, this is what Rohit Malpani says, while a patent should reward innovation, in reality, the overwhelming majority of patents are applied to incremental developments on existing medicines. So basically, I talked to one of the pharmacists, one of the head pharmacists at the medical center at Monte yesterday, and he said that currently it takes very little for some of the pharmaceuticals to get these extensions. And what he said was, you know how we buy meds and there's that little rolled up piece of paper with a little print and it's really long and it says contraindications and it gives you the chemical makeup, all of that. He says it could be something as simple as a pharmaceutical writing, just like they have contraindications that you can't take this. It has indications and it talks to what this drug is applicable to. Mark said that some of these pharmaceuticals are just adding something to the indication, like what you can use this drug to, and that falls into the inclusion criteria for an extended patent and gives it more time. So what happens is, with all of these patents, 20 years, and then you tweak it a little and they get 5 years, whatever, all that time, that blocks the manufacturers of generics that have effective drugs that don't cost as much as the brand names. They're not going to manufacture anything because they don't have a market. Plus, what happens is the pharmaceuticals who have the patent, you try it, they're going to slap your hand and they're going to say, you're out of here. We still have the patent. You cannot touch this, and you're not going to get any of your product out into the community at a more effective, at a less money, but just as effective. Malpani says, in contrast to India's strictly patentability criteria, the US patent standards, which allow for the granting of secondary patents for very obvious modifications of existing medicines, this practice, known as evergreening, acts to delay generic competition and keeps prices high, and is a common tactic by which the pharmaceutical industry extends their monopoly on drugs beyond the original patent's 20 years. A recent study found that evergreening extends patent protection by an average of more than 6 years, allowing companies to extend patent protections and keep prices high. Is expensive for U.S. consumers and the U.S. government. And then they give the example of the Novartis case. The patent on the active ingredient in Gleevec is the drug. The cancer drug at the heart of the Novartis case will expire next year in the U.S. However, secondary patents will extend Novartis's market monopoly in the U.S. until 2018, preventing more affordable generics from entering the market. So these patents are really, they're criminal, and we're the ones, and other communities in other parts of the world will be highly affected. I mean, I'm sure we all know people now who have scripts for meds, and they don't go to the pharmacy and they fill the whole script. They'll go to the pharmacy and they'll fill half a script, because that's what they have money for, and that's us here. Right. So that's really at the heart of, well, part of it, at the heart of medical access and the negative fallout of TPP. There's something also called a provision in TPP called data exclusivity. And this speaks to data by the pharmaceutical who holds the original brand. They developed this, and so there's a lot of trials and that kind of information that the big pharmaceuticals had. So this is something from Public Citizen, and they write, typically a drug regulatory authority relies on clinical trial data submitted by a brand name company to approve generic medicines. Under data exclusivity, the regulatory authority cannot rely on the brand name company's critical test data to determine safety and efficacy. The biosimilar, which is the generic medication to the brand, to the biologics meds, this says the biosimilar applicant, which is the generic pharmacy or company, applicant must duplicate the time-consuming and expensive clinical trials, even though the outcome is already known, and they have to wait until the end of that exclusivity period to apply for market. So here the delays are phenomenal, and the provisions on the TPP affect us directly. Not only here, but in other, look at the, 11 countries under TPP. And here Public Citizen goes on to speak about, here's something interesting, I thought. Patients fighting cancer, rheumatoid arthritis, MS and Alzheimer's disease, and other serious illnesses rely increasingly on biologics, which is the main pharmacy, the brand name drug. In fact, most novel cancer-fighting drugs are biologics. These new generation treatments are derived from living organisms, include vaccines, gene and cellular therapies, allergy shots, and others. But they're probably the most expensive. This says in 2012, 11 of the 12 cancer-treating drugs that were approved by the FDA cost more than $100,000. And then they go on to say that biosimilars, which is the generic brand, under TPP, they won't be allowed to enter the market. And it gives an example here. In Peru, breast cancer is leading cause of death for women in that country. The most effective treatments against the disease are far beyond the consumer's reach. For instance, Herceptin, which is one of the drugs that's used to treat breast cancer, costs around $47,500, approximately 8 times Peru's gross national income per capita of $5,880. With limited access to the medicines they need, many of the women will not be able to follow treatment, and they'll abandon it altogether because they have no access to medicines that they can afford. One thing here, Public Citizen also writes is, in 2030, the global cancer burden is expected to increase by 75%, with 22 million new cases annually. If current trends continue, although the rate of cancer prevalence is higher in wealthier countries, 80% of global deaths occur in low and middle-income countries, where oftentimes less than 1% of public and private healthcare expenditures are dedicated to cancer. Legally blocking biosimilar competition in the Asia-Pacific region could disincentivize biosimilar manufacturers and limit the global competition necessary to drive prices down for all. So it's, here's something I thought was really funny. There's nothing funny about this, but this is a little graph, and it shows, it talks about how does evergreening restrict access to medicine. So it has a little capsule, and it says, original drug, 20-year patent awarded. Then the next little arrow shows that same capsule with a little mustache and sunglasses. And then it says, new dosage, additional patent awarded. And then the third one has the little capsule with a little hat with a flower on it. And then it says, new formula, additional patent awarded. So there, it's a link of continuous kind of awards to the pharmaceuticals, and which effectively block anybody accessing affordable, effective meds. The issue of data exclusivity, which was mentioned before, about how a generic would like to manufacturer would like to manufacture a generic, but with the data from the pharmaceutical, from the brand pharmaceutical, keeping their cards close to the chest, this is not, the new generics, the new meds are not going to come to market. And here there is, they talk a bit about, what is this, colchicine. Data exclusivity raises the price of medicines even when no patent exists. For example, in the US, the price of colchicine, a treatment used mainly for gout, rose more than 5,000% after data exclusivity was enacted. Colchicine has been in use for thousands of years, costs almost nothing to produce, and cannot be patented. Therefore, generic formulations of the tablet have been widely available since the 19th century. However, a new monopoly on colchicine was created in 2009 when the FDA accepted clinical data from a one-week trial of the drug and granted data exclusivity to the pharmaceutical. Subsequently, the pharmaceutical sued to force other manufacturers off the market, and that pharmaceutical raised the price of the pill from 9 cents to $4.85. And this is from the New England Journal of Medicine. So this issue of medical access it's just mind-boggling to me, and it's also a very scary thing, because we're having difficulties now dealing with this, with our medication, but when you think of global effects of this, it is, it really is scary. And I think we're going to talk a bit about, what is it that we can do to kind of be vocal about this and hopefully have an impact on all these areas, not only the medical, but it's a big concern, and it certainly is something that I think warrants more forums like this so that we can share information and kind of get ideas of what's out there, what's been happening, and how we can have a more active, we can play a more active role in maybe not turning this thing around, but certainly coming to a middle ground where we'll all benefit somehow.
Thank you. So we have the fortunate juxtaposition. If the threat to your water and the threat to your jobs and the threat to your healthcare wasn't enough, we're going to talk a little bit about animal cruelty and food safety. So the juxtaposition of food safety and the impending lunch, I think, is an interesting one. So we have Robyn Hederman, who's going to talk to us a bit about these issues and how teaching people affect them.
I'm going to be different. Sit down. Gosh, I gotta look at that. Yeah. Okay, you ready? Good. I'm just going to talk. I'm not going to talk too long because I know it's almost lunch. Oh, okay. And I know your lunch is coming very shortly. I just want to talk a little bit. It's a different approach, but I just want to talk a little. Oh, sorry. I just want to talk a little bit. It's a different approach on the correlation, which we've heard a lot the last few years between animal cruelty and food safety, and that's been recognized actually for quite a while in history. And I just want to bring this up shortly. Is that in the 19th century, Henry Berg, who had established the ASPCA, he was very big on this, and he crusaded against food industry, and he was actually responsible for some of the first laws that we have in New York State on this, and also a federal law which is still exists today. And one of those laws, and what I want to do is I just wanted to touch briefly on some of the laws that I think that we have now that are related to this issue, and that then maybe look at how these laws could be affected by the TPP. Because the more I looked into it, it seemed like a lot of these laws could be buried. Now, a lot of the laws we have now, I feel are very insufficient as is. In terms of food, basically in terms of animals and food, there's really no federal law that has any standards in terms of how animals are treated as they live, how they're processed. There's only laws in terms of when they're actually slaughtered. So the only laws that we have really is one, the 28-hour law, which involves transportation, which Henry Berg was very specific in getting in 1872, which stemmed from the disease that was coming from, especially in Chicago, with the meat market, because they would transport the animals long distances to get to Chicago. By the time they would not be unloaded from the carts. So basically, when they would bring them over, by the time they would reach Chicago, they were horribly diseased. They were in horrible shape, and also they were horribly diseased. There was a cattle plague, and all this stuff was going on. So basically, there was a law that still exists today that is the 28-hour law, and basically, with that law, they require that they have to have rest every 28 hours, they have to get out, they have to be fed, they have to get water. And that was really a safety issue. That still exists now. The other law is the humane slaughter law, which affects how animals are slaughtered. That's a very insufficient law and is really based in the favor of the corporations. The humane slaughter law does not even apply whatsoever to chickens. Chickens who are basically like 90% of the animals that are slaughtered are not covered by that, so they have absolutely no protections whatsoever. So those two laws are really in existence now. They're very insufficient in terms of food safety, and they're very insufficient in terms of animal cruelty. The USDA is in charge of enforcement, and basically they are considered that they are in cahoots with the industry. And to give an example, anytime there has been any problem in terms of tainted meat, animal cruelty, you hear a lot about this now where you see the videos and things like that. There were always inspectors there, and this is recently. Every time something happened, the only reason it got out was because some activist put out a video. And there were always USDA inspectors there, and they're really very lenient, and they've been chastised by the Inspector General of the USDA that they let this go on all the time, which not only is animal cruelty, but also affects what you're eating. And I just want to bring up one issue which I think is important now, also as to your health, and then I will go on to look at how I believe the TPP affects these things and makes it even worse. There's an issue that's going on recently now, which will affect everyone's health with the downed animals. And these are some of the laws that people are trying to get past now, which of course, if this, the TPP gets in effect, it's going to affect a lot of the laws we already have, which are insufficient anyway, and also it will affect laws that we are trying to get. And as we speak now, right in May, there's been a lot of our representatives have signed a petition. There's a loophole with the USDA that allows downed calves into the food system. So these downed calves, does anyone know what downed calves are? They are very, very sick. So the way the statute's written is that if they can be brought, if they can walk, so the things that they do to make them walk are really horrendous. And a video just came out, another one on a Jersey plant a few months ago in January, which is closed now because it was so horrendous. And the treatment was so horrendous, these animals are very, very sick. So, and there's a loophole where they're allowed to go into the food system. And a lot of our congressmen and senators have recently signed a petition to try to close this loophole. So this is another thing that's being worked on, which affects animal cruelty and safety. I want to speak about a few other things that are not necessarily on safety, but as I looked into them, I saw that they would be could be really problematic in terms of if this TPP comes into effect. Sarah Stewart is a counsel for the Humane Society International. She actually, in 2009, actually testified in front of the committee regarding this and some of her concerns should the TPP come into. And she was trying to put her input in. And there's another piece of a treaty that I would like to point out that I think could be also very affected by this, and that's the CITES Treaty, which is the International Trade in Endangered Species. And that's a real big problem now. I don't know if you've been hearing about that, but Clinton is involved with it, and a lot of other people are involved with it because basically the way we're going now with the African elephants, in 10 years they should be extinct. And this is going to be very affected by this treaty should it come into effect. Last year alone, 35,000 elephants were killed with the poaching, and basically this is getting worse every year. We will not have any elephants, as they said, in about 10 years. So they're trying to get laws now. Interpol is involved, Humane Society is involved, a lot of the government organizations are involved. And what the Humane Society is worried about is, again, that any of these restrictions that we're trying to put in place, should this treaty come into effect, it's totally going to be meaningless. And some of the worst violators of this are going to be part of this treaty. So that's going to affect the environment, it's going to affect animals, so that's definitely going to be affecting us. And I just want to touch on a few things as I was looking, because some of it I was unaware of too, but okay, there's a few other topics I just want to touch on. We recently got a law passed, which took a long time, on shark finning. and now it is, shark fin is, do anyone know what that is? You do, okay. Okay, it's, for those who do not know, it's a delicacy. Shark fins are a delicacy in a lot of countries like China and different other places. And what they do with the sharks is they just cut off their fins, they take the fins and they throw the shark back in. They don't even kill the shark at that point. And this is a delicacy, and it's supposed to be for health benefits and such and such. So we just finally, in New York, got a law passed that bans the sale of that. That took a really long time. But again, if this treaty goes into effect, obviously these laws could be adversely affected. And as I was looking at some of the other, I just wanted to say that I was looking at some of the prior problems that came up even with NAFTA, and they really brought to my attention some of the issues that could come up that I hadn't even really thought about. If you want to look at rulings that have already occurred with NAFTA, and I just want to mention a few of those before I close. Some of the issues that have already come up, and if you look at some of the issues now, we can see how this will play out here, is one, the whole issue when we had the whole dolphin-safe tuna. A lot of the countries, like Mexico, was very opposed to this, and they had sued us, basically, saying this was an unfair restriction on them. And basically, we put up a very weak defense as to this. Another issue is, to give us an example, is the Europe, Britain in particular, did not want our meat because of all the antibiotics, which is the whole issue. So they really were not interested in having our meat. They were penalized. They had the choice of either paying a fine or accepting it. And they were penalized that it was decided it was a trade barrier, but they have chosen to pay the fine instead, because they do not want our antibiotic-ridden meat. So these are some of the things that can come up, and I can see that they've already come up under NAFTA and other treaties, but I can see under this that they'll be made much, much worse. Another issue is baby seals. Canada, Norway, Iceland, they challenged that. These are the earlier, let's see, there was I'm trying to think if there was anything else. I guess that's basically it at this point, but the EU had banned steel jaw traps. They banned that input, and anytime they want a sovereign country wants to oppose a particular thing, I think, I'm not an expert on this, but it seems to me that the country that can sue in terms of that we are, any kind of restrictions we have on either health or animal protection, food safety, they can sue us based on that, saying that it is a detriment to their free trade. So on that note, I just think, it's something we should think about. I was thinking, the more I was reading, I was really more horrified than I had known, because my original thought was, well, the laws are pretty bad anyway, but then I saw that it could get a lot worse. So I'm glad to be here, and thank you very much.